I'm almost nervous to say this in front of François Desjardins, who was my doctoral supervisor, and a world-known constructivist who teaches online in his wooden canoe. When I met François, he was a professor at the University of Ottawa and director of a lab called Critique, if you remember, old memories. I had read a few of his papers. He had published in the Institut Anaximandre d'études épistémiques, and I didn't understand a thing. It seemed very interesting, but it was not the usual empirical articles that we usually read here. Other professors published empirical studies with context, review of literature, with methodology and data and findings. And for his, each sentence seemed to be a thesis. I felt quite intimidated, but I decided to book an appointment with him to ask if he wanted to take a new PhD student. It turned out that his expertise was the role of technologies in education. I knew nothing about technology, and I was actually quite a bad computer user myself. We talked for 2 hours. I don't remember what we said exactly, but I remember that he accepted to supervise me, and a few months later I was admitted into a PhD in education. Doing my PhD with Dr. Desjardins meant that I constantly had to present my ideas in public, sometimes with the most challenging publics. This included well-known professors such as Rénal Lacasse, Claude Lamontagne, who were his mentors as well, diversified and interdisciplinary publics, sometimes teachers who were not very open to my ideas, and they told me publicly, Davidson, we don't believe you. François was probably the toughest PhD supervisor that one could choose, but it served me very well. For those of you who have heard me talk on epistemology of learning, such as Rhonda, from a constructivist perspective, you will now understand a bit more where my ideas come from. I did not make them up. I learned them from François. You might even recognize some of the representations I use, because we've been using them for over 15 years, and they're his representations. So, without further ado, François, this is your time.
Constructivism, yeah, I've been, how can I put it? I've been surrounded by people in my early studies that were either constructivists or radical constructivists. I had the absolute pleasure and honor of actually meeting with and having long chats with Ernst von Wasserfeld, which some of you I'm sure probably know because he was well known in the Montreal area, and his whole idea of radical constructivism. So that did sort of like radically change the way I was thinking about many things. And then later on, coming in contact with the whole idea of George Kelly's ideas, then connections started to happen. So this is what I will be kind of getting into. But I'm retired, have been retired for 2 years. This is sort of like a coming back to a room full of people standing in front here. I panicked this morning when I got up, and I'm not out of the panic yet, so please be indulgent. I also want to absolutely clarify that I'm by no means an expert in the area of personal construct psychology, not by any stretch of the imagination. I just got lucky and stumbled onto Kelly at some point, which gave me some ideas. So what I'm going to try to do is basically go from those kinds of ideas and show you how they influenced me in the field of education. When it came to the theme of the conference, reconnecting and celebrating diversities, I really identified with the concept because I spent most of my academic career working in a francophone community in the other province, Ontario, which is an anglophone majority province, where the francophones are a very small minority. And that meant dealing with, especially in grad studies and things of that nature, dealing with trying to deliver programs to communities that are very widespread, very thin, and in a huge surface, if you want, of a province. So distance education became a really private concern. So anyways, diversity is something that I absolutely want to celebrate in the sense that in two ways. One, the idea that distance education for me was a means initially was a means to be able to bring a community that spread over a large territory together. And secondly is from this diversity and from this problem of distance education, it made me rethink pedagogy quite profoundly and go back to the ideas that Ann-Louise was just talking about, of radical constructivism, and then George Kelly's ideas. So, if this works. Okay, when Ann-Louise added the Kelly's quote in the program, "We are scientists of our own lives," that rang extremely familiar to me, in a sense that the idea of the learner reconstructing knowledge in a similar manner as a scientist construct knowledge to begin with is really what I was kind of after. So in other words, instead of having learners be the recipients of content, I used to walk around, remember my glass head? I had a glass head, you know those things for weeks? I had a glass head. I'd walk in a classroom one day in the BEd program, just a little sidebar, and with a can of Coke, right? And I just sort of like took the head upside down and I poured the can of Coke in. This is education. You fill the heads with something. And people started laughing and so on and so forth. This is okay, then I poured it out. See what happens when you turn it right side up, everything leaves. So we got to do something radically different. And that stuck with me, and because the reaction I got, I just expected a big laugh out of everybody, but some people, it's sort of all of a sudden, they realized that the idea of filling heads was not really relevant. Okay, so the idea of lecturing, and that's why I came up with this title, the idea of lecturing was really akin to the idea of filling these heads with a can of Coke. That's before the whole health kick button up. I'm talking 30 years ago. The idea of moving towards lurking, to me, became an interesting concept, and the paper that Ann-Louise was referring to a while ago, which I will actually come back to in here, was in my head trying to define what was the learning space, and what is the role of the teacher, what is the role of the learner. If we're not going to fill heads with knowledge, because it doesn't work, if we cannot transmit or deliver content and deliver knowledge, then what do we do? And put that also in the idea of a distance educational context, where there's a screen between you and the learner. Guess what? They're in control. They can turn you off and on at will. They can just watch the recording afterwards. Just like right now, this is being broadcast on Facebook, but like I was doing yesterday, and Nadia saw me, I logged in a number of times to see what was happening, and then what I would do, the ones that I want to see this, I went a little later, I'd watch the recording. Okay? So you weren't in control of what I was watching, I was. Okay? So that concept sort of like was beginning to make all kinds of things. So anyways, what I'm going to do, try to do really quickly is basically take you through that story, through a brief genesis of my thinking and my experience in teaching first the grad and undergrad, and how and why I chose to move to a complete online context. It was an absolute choice, and it's a choice I do not regret, but it presented the challenges I needed to have to really put my money where my mouth is, in that sense, is moving to a radical constructivist and even beyond to a constructionist perspective of what education is. And I'm doing right now the exact opposite. I am talking, you're listening. So, anyways, my experience. I moved from traditional face-to-face teaching, like I'm doing now in the classroom, because that's what the job called for at the time, to a technology-supported teaching and learning. That was in the early 80s. Guess what? We began to have computers, and we were starting to do certain things. Do you remember the LCD tablets you could put on the overhead projector, and you'd get a very faint projection on the screen? Tried those. Then we move into things like hybrid or blended teaching and learning. That's when you would have a little bit like this context here, that part of an audience here, and it had part of an audience online elsewhere, to a fully online kind of context where I was literally in front of a screen and the students were all over the world. Some would say, I'd say good evening, because my course was at 6 p.m. in the afternoon in the Toronto area, and I'd have some on the West Coast that had just run in from classroom because they're teachers, and they'd run in and it was like 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. or whatever, and then I'd have some poor guy who was sitting in Saudi Arabia, and he was saying good morning. It was 2 a.m. or something for him with his coffee. And this was rather interesting. So, but going through this, you go through the non-existent technology all the way to, at one point, it's ubiquitous in the sense that it's not only ubiquitous, but it's between every participant in the group. that creates challenges, but at the same time, it creates opportunities, and that's what I was kind of after. You might remember this, Ann-Louise. This is way back when I was teaching my first distance ed courses. It was video conferencing with a group in Toronto and a group in Windsor. And I was in Ottawa, and I had a group of 85 students that you can't see, thank God, in a room like this. And I had 2 TV screens. I'm not talking flat screens. I'm talking, the big, heavy Samsung beasts that were hanging on the ceiling. And that's where I would see my group of Windsor and Toronto, which were 30 students and about 20 students. And that's how I would teach. Kind of interesting. To move to the latest concept, this is Adobe Connect, which some of you must recognize. I know we're all in this. And the idea is that every student can see every student. We are all equals. I'm here, I'm no bigger or no smaller than any of yours. We all have an equal voice. And then it creates a context where there's not a me up here and them out there anymore. It's an equal voice kind of thing. So it already sort of creates a context where, well, I'm no longer necessarily directing the learning space, but I'm just participating in the learning space. I'll get back to that a little later. The big thing is that when you're looking at the traditional face-to-face and so on and so forth, just look at this context here, lecture-driven, content-centered, I'm running the show, you're listening. And as you move to more technology present in between the individuals and so on and so forth, that distance gets greater, the interface gets thicker, and the learner has more and more control simply because you've got less and less control as the prop, as the teacher, as the instructor. And that it can create a problem if you're not aware of it, or it can create an opportunity to rethink the pedagogy, which is what I was trying to do. And it becomes very learner driven, and that you need to accept right in the beginning. So we go from lecturing, content-centered, very classroom-centric, class discussions, project enhanced, and all that fun stuff. But when you get here, you get to process-centered. I use problem-based learning and then move a little beyond that, and it's socially networked, and that's a key element. In a classroom, you're isolated from the outside world, okay? Then if you go to the fully online format, then you are instantly socially networkable, socially networked, and if the prof wants to try to isolate the students, it doesn't work, because even right now, I could have, and put it this way, if you were a class of first year, even fourth year students, as I'm sure many of you have had the experience, everybody is either on Facebook, texting to somebody else, whatever, they're connecting with the outside world in the classroom. You don't have their full attention. So, and trying to say that I will control the environment so that I have full attention, not going to work, okay? So, what I was then trying to figure out is, okay, well, how can I make use of this? How can I turn this thing into something that is positive and useful? And in the previous slide, when I had that shot of the group in Adobe Connect, actually I had a guest speaker. Well, he thought he was a guest speaker, poor Stephen. I had Stephen Downs, in that particular time, I had Stephen Downs from Halifax. And he was in with the group, interacting with the group, and they were asking him questions, and they were having a discussion. And then when the whole thing ended, he realized that he hadn't done his presentation, which is cool, because the students actually had, probably the lights? No falling asleep. Okay, in the lights, we'll turn it back up. I even did some really strange things, like taught a first in my canoe one day, just to start the discussion with the students about, where does our concept of workspace, play space, family time, work time, the 9 to 5, especially with teachers, when the door closes of the classroom, I go home, this is my family time, and you should not mix the two. So I just dumped my canoe, and this was, of course, in summer, turned on and hooked up and so on and so forth, and they asked me, where the heck are you? I said, where do you think I am? And then they started realizing I was in the canoe in the middle right in front of my place. And I said, okay, am I at work? Am I in your classroom? Is this work time, play time? Are you going to tell my boss that I'm not in the classroom where I should be? And so on and so forth. And this was just to start the discussion on the boundaries. Once I started that thing, the discussion went, I just turned off, left, and the whole idea of rethinking boundaries was happening on its own, just with that problem. The only problem is then I was asked to do a keynote in England, and that's what the thing at the top is. And they said, can you do keynote for us? Sure, you know, right? What dates on and so forth. What time? Oh, it's at 10 in the morning. London time. What time do you think it was in my place? Here. It's 5 a.m. I said, the sun comes up at 5:13 on the lake on that June 7th, 2012, whatever. They said, yeah, well, we could delay it a little bit. So at 4:30, I'm on the lake paddling. I'll hook up and do that. All of this, though, it's when I stumbled onto this article in, I forget when, teaching smart people how to learn. So that's cool. But what I did realize is that statement that Bruce said, you know, the marketplace is increasingly depends on learning, yet most people don't know how to learn. I said, okay, that's a broad statement, and the rest of the article goes on and makes a good demonstration of the problem that we've got, is we've got a lot of people going around, taking courses, getting training, and so on and so forth, but they have never actually thought about how they learn, the idea of their own epistemology. And I found that fascinating because here I was, the rah-rah constructivist, and says, okay, I'm going to let the students learn on their own. And what was happening? Well, there was a hit and miss kind of thing. It's very nice to say that you will construct your own knowledge. You'll be the scientist of your own learning. But what if you weren't trained as a scientist of your own learning? What if you have no clue as to where to start? And this is what this article basically was kind of making the broad statement. And I thought it was rather interesting because how can we have built an education system over thousands of years where we are hell-bent on training people up to do all kinds of things, we are delivering all kinds of information that we want them to memorize, yet nobody's paying attention to how they learn. So I thought it was kind of interesting. Then how do you do it though? How do you help them to learn? He was mentioning things like this double loop learning, metacognition, and learning from failures and so on and so forth. And he had a few of those concepts that were kind of interesting, but they were still very much, as Roland would say, ill-defined. They were interesting, but double loop learning, what he was basically suggesting, and the metacognition, is that you learn, you read something, you try to comprehend, and so on and so forth, and then you go out and you try it, and then you look back to, is your understanding, your basic understanding, still match what your practical application worked? And it was kind of rudimentary. And it reminded me of Karl Popper. Everybody know Karl Popper? In his 3 worlds. Does that ring a bell to anybody? Who knows Karl Popper? It's read Karl Popper. I know you. Okay, cool. Karl Popper, English philosopher, passed away in 80 something or other.
Austrian.
Sorry?
Austrian.
Austrian?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, but he lived in England most of his life. Okay, Austrian. There you go. Thank you. Popper wrote a famous book called Conjectures and Refutations, and the whole idea of the 3 worlds that he was suggesting, that he then sort of like tore apart a little bit because of the sequence, and he's saying that first we experiment with things. From these experiential pieces of living that we do, we build mental theories, small little models, small little explanations, so that we can then predict what's going to happen the next time, and that's how we are able to function through life. And these theories that we actually build are that in what we call world 3. So you've got the experiences, world 1, world 2, thinking about it to come up with, world 3, the theory. And then you try it again, and oh, next time it doesn't work. You analyze it. You double loop back, you analyze it, why didn't it work? And then you alter your theory, your model, you change it a little bit, and you create a better one. Learning from failure. Except that, that's cool, Popper had that. Where is that in our thinking about pedagogy and about education and so on and so forth? And at the same time, I came across an article by George Kelly. I was working with Renal Lacasse and Claude Lamontagne that Ann-Louise mentioned a while ago. And that's, you'll recognize stuff, HyperCard, early 80s on the Mac. We wanted to see how kids, elementary school kids, would build concepts in geometry. and I say construct concepts and build concepts rather than do the rote learning kind of thing. You know, this is a parallelogram, this is a square. So we designed this little thing where we use triadic elicitation, straight out of Kelly's kinds of things. And we thought it was absolutely fantastic because we built this little program, the kids would try it, they'd click on the two figures that were similar, they'd write a little bit of a sentence as to why they thought those two were similar, and then they'd go through a whole thing, checking out a big matrix, find the other ones that share this characteristic. And we had built this, we had built a little bit of an AI thing into it where it would take them through looking at 5 basic categories of the quadrilateral. And we then started looking at we started analyzing the text that they were writing in, and how were they constructing these concepts. The thing turned out to be quite interesting. It really worked. We were never able to produce the software on a large scale, whatnot, but that was never our intention. But what we did learn is that once you let the kids through the process, but you put certain parameters on that process using something like a technique like triadic elicitation, you can actually train them to train themselves to learn. And it was no longer about teaching them the concepts of the mathematics, that they were doing on their own. But it was about training them to learn how to learn, to become scientists of their own learning. And it's that kind of an awareness that you said, aha, that for me rang really true, and this is something I wanted to pursue. Unfortunately, Bernard Lacasse, a really, really good friend, passed away, and that whole thing sort of kind of died down as a research project. But we were able to continue to at least use the ideas and try to see how much further we could go in a distance education piece. So, the thing I really came out with from that experience is epistemological competency. It's the single most important condition for successful learning of any discipline. Otherwise, you get people that have memorized a bunch of things, they might be able to apply them, but they can't move beyond it. If you want to be able to produce autonomous learners, if you want to be able to solve the problem that Professor Harris had raised, that we're on an economy where we're dependent on learning, yet people don't know how to learn, I quickly realized through that simple little experiment with those kids and quadrilaterals and Kelly's ideas that we need to make sure that we develop something to help people develop an epistemology of the disciplines they're learning, develop an epistemological competency to be able to look for. It's not about learning history, it's about learning what the nature of history is. It's not learning math that's important, it's learning what the nature of mathematics is. It's not learning physics, it's what it is the nature of physics. Once you understand what the nature of the knowledge in physics, the knowledge in mathematics, the knowledge in history is, once you start understanding, then you can move forward and look at history as not just a collection of facts that have to be memorized, but as something that is a living history. I mean, they're historical facts. You can't change it. Wrong. Talk to any historian who's looked at a theory of what history is and understands what the epistemology of history is. And what's happening is you will be looking at the fact that historians looking at old documents, old artifacts, and so on and so forth, they try to interpret these, and then they try to create an image of what they think might have happened back then. So history is something that's constantly changing. It is something that is a living science. I'm using history because it's usually the one that people say, you don't change those facts. Mathematics the same way. Mathematics, if you learn those things, they won't change. Talk to any true mathematician, and what you're going to get, math is an ever-ending quest for something else. And they use terms he was using terms like discrete mathematics and so on and so forth. I know nothing of math. Okay, sorry. I mean, it took me 20 years to understand basic concepts in statistics, but that's okay. But what I do realize is that the epistemology of the discipline is far more important to understand than the discipline itself for the learner. And therefore, if the learner can get a grasp of what the epistemology of the discipline is, and if they can understand how they can function with that epistemology, then they can go on and learn without the teacher. And I saw a poster one day in a teacher's conference room. A teacher's lunchroom, and said, the best teachers are the ones that work themselves out of a job. I said, that's where I want to go. That's where I want to go. In other words, to totally autonomous learners. Okay, establishing the roles. Here we go, Ann-Louise. This is the paper, the first paper you came in contact with. A novice learner. I was trying to figure out how do I get these kids to develop their own epistemology and their own epistemological competency. First of all, I had to understand what the spaces were. So the novice learner is the one that at some point we've established that, okay, this is what they know, but this is what they don't know also. So we get ourselves, we create a portrait, a mental portrait of what the learner is. And then what we have to also really understand is that the learner will go through a bunch of experiences, we all do at any point. Okay, we go through a bunch of experience from sitting in a classroom to going out there and doing something, and these experiences, we learn through them. We do things, we have little failures, we have little successes, we try to repeat the successes and avoid the failures, and so on and so forth. We go through these bunch of potential experiences. But when you're looking at specific courses or specific disciplines and so on and so forth, you have a target. And I call it the expert knowledge, okay? So that target is, what do we want that learner or those learners to actually be able to do or to know or to understand or whatever? What do we want them to have at the end? Unfortunately, not all potential experiences of the learner will lead them to that, okay? Because you can go astray in all kinds of directions, learn something, but it has nothing to do with the target. So what we have to understand also is, what are the necessary experiences that would lead to that target expertise? Okay? That concept gets a little interesting because we usually are very good at identifying what we want them to know, but we haven't really identified how they would get there. And often we will design our pedagogy from a straight line to go from there to there, and we choose all the specific steps and so on and so forth, the course outline, to get them to this point. But not all learners necessarily function in that little narrow band there. They may want to go all kinds of other places which would be more relevant to them. Your straight line may not be their straight line. My straight line is definitely not everybody else's straight line. Okay? But what we have to understand is that, yeah, but somewhere between those potentials and the necessary experiences, there's what I call the learning space. That's where the learning occurs that actually gets them to somewhere along the line to where the target is. The fun part is, that's the lurking space. And that's where the teacher, professor, instructor, whoever, tutor should be. Not in the learning space, but in the lurking space. And the role of the role of the teacher, go back. The role of the teacher instructor is to, in that first part, is to try to keep them going inside. If they go too far out of their potential experiences, sometimes they will take on lines that will not only lead them astray, but it could lead them into dangerous territories or whatever. I mean, there has to be at some point in the lurking space, they're still operating out here, but you want to push them back in. Once they're past this, and they start converging necessarily, they will be converging towards the target. That's where the fun is to try to pull them out of it. In other words, not try to push them back in so that they get the target, try to get them to explore something outside so they don't just go into a straight line into it. And it's once they start exploring what's outside of this, they will then be able to define, I'm not speaking very theoretically, but they'll be able to define what the limits and the parameters of the necessary experience is. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go into how I tried to achieve this. Not necessarily successfully, but the kinds of experiences I did. But the lurking space is where the fun is for a prof, for an instructor, for a teacher, especially if you're doing it online, because that boundary becomes very thick because of the technology and the distance. But you can have a lot of fun here, and not only can you have a lot of fun, but the kind of learning that will occur within the learning space will be far more powerful because it's not going to be yours, it's going to be the learner's. And that's what I wanted to have some fun. Okay, so the learning space. What I would do with students in here is that, okay, setting the targets, we all know you get, because of institutions, you have to have your in the course outline, you have to have the outcomes or the goals or the whatever for the course you're teaching. That's cool, go ahead and do it, you know. But when you're doing it online and so on and so forth, I tend to really piss off the administration and say, well, I'm not putting outcomes on the course outline because those will be negotiated with the students. So I present a few of them, then they are completely negotiated with the students so that we come to an agreement of the course outline, of the course outcomes, so that the students will agree to them. And the reason for that is not that I don't want to write the outcomes myself, but if I impose outcomes to the students that they don't understand, how the heck are they going to get there? All right? If I negotiated with them, at the very least we agree and understand the language. And once they understand the target and that we all agree on what the target is going to be, then we've got something where they can start building on their own because they know what they're going to build. They've chosen to have some input on what they're going to build. Critical. So, how do I do this? Here are some of the kinds of things that I tend to use. From the course descriptor, that's the little piece that would be published in the course outline, even on the online courses. The institutional piece, right? I have the groups identify key elements of the domain of study using free listing techniques. Everybody know what free listing techniques are? You know? So what I would do with the students, I'd say, Google it. Okay? I would say Google it because anytime I would put a term in there, in bold, underlined, I used to do it in blue, okay, that's a bad idea. That means Google the term, you'll find out what it is. I'm not suggesting you Google it right now, you can if you want to, but at least write the term down. I'm not going to spend my time explaining it. But free listing is one of the techniques, by the way, out from the whole Kelly's, it's a derivative of Kelly's ideas. And it's a technique that you can, I've tried it with groups of 25, I've tried it with groups of 5, 10, and I did try it one day with a group of 75 people, and it worked. Okay, I just wanted to push it in a little. I haven't tried it beyond that, but very soon I'm going to have a group that's going to try it with a group of 200 or 300 students, and I'm cringing at what might happen. But what the heck? If we don't try it, we won't know it. We've got to learn from failure, right? So free listing. Look it up. You'll find some interesting stuff. I've got a few more of those.
I googled it. It says it's something I can put in the yellow pages for free, so maybe that's
no, that's fine. No, you'll eventually find it as a technique. If you want to Google that one, Google this one too. Yeah, then establish the targets or expectations for each other using a Socratic wheel technique. Ann-Louise knows that one because she's actually the one that taught me that technique, and then I had to look it up and dig it up a little more and so on and so forth. It's absolutely fabulous. So Socratic wheel. And actually, if you go Google Socratic wheel, go images, you'll get about 1,000 of them. And any one of those, they'll describe the technique on how to use it and so on and so forth. The beauty of it is that those kinds of techniques have all the people, all the students, all the participants have input into it, and they all get to understand the language because it's their language that gets put into this, and not yours, and not the books, and not some other authors. Okay, and that helps define the potential experience, and it helps define the boundaries of that learning space because you come up with a common language. Yes, it is a little more time-consuming at the beginning of the course. I found, and some of my colleagues found when I started suggesting it to them, but what it does, it speeds up a heck of a lot afterwards because you give up control of the class and students, and they're at least all talking the same language, and it's a language that is searchable, and that they can actually, they're going to get something out of it. Okay? So those are the kinds of techniques that I use to start. But the one thing that I've always warned people is the dip, implementation dip. If you want to Google another term, implementation dip. That one I will explain because when you're trying to help the students learn how to learn, they have a certain performance level, X, Y, Z, whatever, okay, at a certain point, and over time they just keep going through it, and that performance level will stay there. Or if you're lucky, you'll try to get, you'll try to get some growth in their ability to learn. I'm not talking about their ability to understand the discipline itself, but their ability to learn. When you introduce these kinds of techniques that I've just been mentioning as just examples, what happens initially, you introduce these kinds of learner-driven pedagogy and problem-based learning and then project-based learning and all that fun stuff. But what happens is you get a dip. The performance level drops because they are not used to being on their own. They're not used to thinking on their own. They're used to tell me what to do. Well, what's your expectations? How are you going to assess this? What do you want me to do? How many words? How many pages? How many pages? Last time I heard that, do it sooner. But the thinking is there, okay? We have to change that culture. That learner culture has to change. And when you're trying to do this in one course, online, it can be tricky. But the thing is to not give up. Keep at it. You'll get that dip. At some point, they start realizing that, oh, yeah, if I do this, I will move forward, but it's still very slow. The thing is over time, they will be able to. There will be a transformation of their learning. And they will reach an improved level of their own learning. They will be far more autonomous, far less dependent on you as the prof, as the instructor, and they will be able to not only learn the discipline, but they will be able to understand what that discipline is about, and eventually be able to learn on their own, which is really what we're after, because you don't want to keep coming back. Okay, so look for and analyze failures. That's not for me, but for them to do. I want them to find what the problems are. And in many cases, I would do crowdsourcing, another Google term. And because, remember I said social media, I was using a lot of social media in the classroom, so on and so forth. Since I've got them all on online, distance, video conferencing, I would run a Twitter feed on the side. Twitter feed, yeah, with the hashtag for the course code. And since all these students, most of them also had a Twitter account and had all kinds of followers and colleagues and other teachers and whatnot, I would throw out questions every once in a while. I said, tweet that out, see what comes back. Tweet that out. Yeah, you're all on Twitter right now anyways, or on Facebook, so I don't care. Whether you're on Facebook or on Twitter, use the course hashtag and throw it out and see what comes back. And then start getting some feedback from the people. Initially, I would use simple questions that I would throw out, like define this term and so on and so forth. Eventually, let's talk about this concept, and then to move towards, okay, you've got a good idea, you just present something, throw this out to the rest of your colleagues and everybody's friends, and everybody retweet it. The first thing you know, the idea goes out, and my little group of 25 people suddenly became a group of 765 people. And I was getting feedback from those people. I was getting ideas from people. Obviously, if they're your friends and your friends, they're likely to be, probably a good chunk of them will be in education. A good chunk of them will be in psychology. So you're getting feedback from those communities that go far beyond the classroom. And then the feedback they're getting is not necessarily always in agreement with them. They'll get all kinds of disagreements. They'll get all kinds of questions. They'll get all kinds of other comments. The learning occurs, and I'm no longer the center of the universe. They are, and they're getting the stuff coming back from crowdsourcing. Works like gangbusters, and that the more the social media it really works. Look for meta solutions. Collaborate on RepGrid. I won't say more than RepGrid, because I know Roland did a couple of sessions on this so far in this conference, but this is also something that can be done at distance. Have you done the one at a distance?
One this afternoon.
Doing it this afternoon? Go with that one. Because you can do the RepGrids and do it online and use a collaborative space, literally, to have the participants work with the RepGrid. And what you're getting is you're getting their elements, their constructs, not yours. And you're able to analyze what their positioning is vis-a-vis those concepts. Oh yeah, here's this new tweeter. Everybody, I've got this great new idea, new concept. Throw it out. We all think it's great and so on and so forth. Tweet it, see what comes back. And Twitter is a fabulous tool if you use hashtags. And don't hashtag, was it the real Donald Trump or something? Try the untried. Once they've tried stuff and it all works, try something else. Okay, that solution works. This idea works. Try something else that will fail. Why would I do that? Because I want you to try something that's going to fail and then analyze why it failed. If you try something and it's going to fail, you watch it fail, and then you analyze why it fails, it will give you and I start showing them. It gives you the limits of what you know will work. It's fine to see that you've got a solution that works, but where are the limits? What are the parameters? What are the boundaries of those solutions? Find something that you know is outside and try to find what the boundaries are. And that's true in just about any discipline. Except swimming, you don't want them to drown. And once you've got those parameters set up, design a new solution that's going to be closer to those limits, but that will still work, or that you feel will still work. Look back and analyze and build new knowledge. It's always the idea of once you've tried something is to get them, not you, but get them to go back on the experience and go back on the experience and to be able to analyze all the pieces that actually did work and try to figure out what else could have worked and what would not have worked. Try to get not just the solution, understand the solution that is proposed, but where the limits are. And that's critical because it's something that we also do not do enough of, is find out where the limits of. Almost done here. We have to deconstruct the old teacher-learner relationship. Because as long as we talk about a teacher-learner relationship, exactly what I'm doing right now, we're preventing learning because I'm trying to direct what you're going to be thinking, except that I realized long ago that in a room like this, with highly dedicated people, highly interested people, and so on and so forth, if I have 40% of your attention, 40% of the time during the hour that I've had you in front of me, I was very, very fortunate. You've all thought of where you're going to be going for lunch, who you're going to be sitting with at lunchtime, or at dinner, or what you're going to be doing tonight, or which conference you're going to be looking at this afternoon. You've all had those kinds of things going through your head. It's normal, I'm done. So this idea of a teacher-centric relationship, we have to deconstruct it. We have to work around it. And that's why I've been trying to do these things. We've got to start teaching learning methods. I know it sounds ridiculous, teach learning methods. I hesitated around the word teach, and I just decided to leave it there, but we have to do something so that learners actually can let themselves teach themselves the content. The content is not what's important, it's them learning how to learn the content that's important. And look around the learning space, not in it. Please stay out of the learning space. If we stay out of the learning space and we help the students actually function in that, and we push them towards the edges but keep them within that learning space, then we are doing our real job, which is supposed to be helping those students, whether they be elementary school or grad students or PhD students, we're helping them become autonomous students. Why should it be that only by the PhD do we accept the fact that, oh yeah, but when you're done, you should be able to function on your own? Shouldn't we be doing that a little earlier? That way, if bet you any money, we'd stop complaining about those new first-year students coming in. Well, they don't know how to do this, they don't know how to do that, they can't read on their own, they can't do anything on their own. We would change a lot of things if we could start doing these kinds of things, and the students would become learners on their own. And I just finished with that line, and because I really like the line that you used from Kelly, and I just sort of figured I would turn it around and let the learners be the scientists of their own learning. If we could achieve that, I'd be so happy. And that's what I've been trying to do, and by doing it online, by teaching fully online, where I had the limitations of, I don't have access to students directly, they're all over the friggin' world, right? And they can turn me off, they can turn the volume off, they can do whatever they want. I have no control over them. So the minute I accepted I had no control, in reality, which I have no control over you in here anyways, right? But when it's at a distance, it's more obvious. Because here I can lock the doors and keep you in here regardless, right? But the minute you're online, you don't have that power. So you have to sort of this to me became very, very obvious, and it's something that I tried to really, I think I almost got there in the last 2 years of my career. It only took me 37 years to get there, 27 years to get there, but it almost happened in the last 2 years where I accepted that the students had to do their own thing. And all I could do was to try to keep them within that learning space, but I had to not be in it. That's the slide you want to see.